Welcome to episode 137 of 10-Minute Record Reviews. This time I'm going to talk about Nina Simone's debut album from 1959, although it was recorded actually in 1957, which came out on Bethlehem Records, and it's just entitled Nina Simone, Jazz is Played in an Exclusive Side Street Club. This is her debut album, and it was recorded at a time when she was playing jazz piano at a cocktail bar for a living, and the set list, which is largely Broadway and Tin Pan Alley standards, is basically reflective of that. And although this is just her first outing on vinyl, you can already see the hallmark of the artist because she was never going to be one that was going to fulfill establishment expectations. She was always going to go in a different direction. The tension between the formality of what she was setting out to play and the way in which she delivers it is completely reflective of the artist herself. Nina Simone, of course, is born Eunice Wayman. She was born in North Carolina in 1933. She begins taking piano lessons about age 4, and she soon becomes a bit of a celebrity in her small community. She was trained classically, and her first formal concert recital occurs when she's age 12. And famously, this was the occasion when her parents were seated at the very front to listen to her and were made to move to the back because, of course, this was 1945 in the segregated South. But Eunice herself, at age 12, demanded that her parents be moved back to the front, which they duly did. Her family was not that well off, so the community all the way through her youth chipped in to pay for her musical education. And in 1950, when she graduated from high school, she went up to Juilliard for the summer and prepared for her application to the Curtis Institute of Music in Philadelphia. But she didn't get in, and she suspected for the rest of her life that it was the color of her skin which got in her way. As black people in America have had to do countless times, she had to overcome that racism and find another route. She took private piano lessons, and she also took a number of odd jobs and began to support herself by playing jazz gigs. This was a little bit of a controversial step for her because her family were quite religious, and jazz in certain quarters in the 1940s was still seen as a decadent, dissolute kind of music. One of the gigs she took in the early 50s to fund her private lessons was at the Midtown Bar and Grill in Atlantic City. And there the owner said, "I don't just want you to play piano, I also want you to sing." And so she became, despite the fact that she was very focused on being a classically trained pianist and a concert pianist, she became a jazz singer at the same time in her spare time. By 1954, she was getting a bit of local notoriety, and she began to worry that her family would discover what she was doing. And so from that point on, she adopted the name Nina Simone as her stage name. After 4 or 5 years in her young adult life of taking lessons and honing her craft, in 1957, she actually comes to the attention of the record industry for the first time. She makes herself a demo, and it fell into the hands of Gus Vilde, who was the owner of Bethlehem Records. He loved the demo and signed her on the spot to a one-album deal. When it came time to record at Beltone Studio, she brought in her friend Jimmy Bond on bass, and Bond in turn reached out for a drummer, a guy called Tootie Heath, who was the brother of the much better-known jazz musician Percy Heath. In late 1957, in a 14-hour session at Beltone Studios, they recorded 14 songs, and the session went very well. But when it came time to release the record, the label was running into problems because they were cash poor and they couldn't actually afford to put out new releases at that time. Vilde was pretty desperate. He didn't want the label to go under, so he struck a deal with a guy called Sid Nathan of King Records out of Cincinnati. And the deal was that Nathan would get half the company in exchange for distributing this record. Pretty harsh terms, but at least the record was going to get released and the company was going to survive. But then the wheels started to come off the cart a little bit. Vilde selected 11 songs for this release, and Nathan disagreed. Feeling pretty confident about his choices, he went to Simone's house, knocked on her door, and had a whole list of other songs that he wanted her to record. She said, "Look, no one's going to talk to me like that," and basically slammed the door in his face. He didn't take to that too kindly. Their relationship soured and never really recovered. He knew her contract was up in 1958 and chose not to renew it. He also stalled the release of the record all the way into 1959. Nina, who wasn't enjoying this experience and in any event, as we recall, wanted to be a concert pianist, not a jazz musician, sold all of her publishing rights and all other rights to this record for $3,000, about 25 grand in today's money, to the company, and never saw another dime for it, which is particularly significant because although the sales were reasonable back in the day when this first came out, one of the songs here, My Baby Just Cares for Me, of course had a massive renaissance in the mid-1980s when it was included in a Chanel ad, and it's estimated that not having the publishing rights basically cost Nina about $1 million in today's money. Anyway, the album was eventually released in 1959. The company makes no attempt to really promote it and does not release a single, but DJs are spinning the album and they're taking a lot of requests, in particular for her treatment of Porgy and Bess, the Gershwin tune. People are calling the company saying, "Why don't you release a single?" Simone herself calls Nathan, and Nathan refuses to take her calls, and it isn't until the song, just basically through word of mouth, catches on in New York City, that ultimately he just felt compelled, just for sheer economic reasons, to release the record and overcome his grudge. By then, of course, Nina had left the label, and she had signed a new deal with Colpix Records. Her Gershwin cover was selling like crazy. It had gone to number 2 in the R&B chart to number 18 on Billboard. It was the biggest seller that Bethlehem Records ever had in its existence. Side 1 begins with the Ellington classic and standard Mood Indigo. Her treatment here shows all of that classical training and all of her versatility. Instantly you can tell you're dealing with somebody who is not just another jazz pianist out of the box. This was somebody really quite different and quite a distinct sound and voice. Next song is Don't Smoke in Bed, which is a piece by Willard Robeson. Here, the classical influence again is completely obvious. The song is about leaving a husband, which is something that Nina knew quite well, sadly enough. Her personal life, of course, was famously unhappy, and that unhappiness, of course, was additionally leavened with her unmedicated and undiagnosed bipolarity and periods of depression and so on. And so the pain she's tapping into here is best known to her, of course, but this is a very, very moving rendition. The next song, He Needs Me, just like the previous one, Don't Smoke in Bed, had actually previously been better known through association with the singer Peggy Lee. And it's another song about a dysfunctional relationship, a bit of a theme on this album, as I'll come to later. The next song, the title track, is Little Girl Blue, which of course is a Rodgers and Hart Broadway composition. But it's a very distinct treatment that Nina Simone offers here. In particular, the song is opened with the tune to Good King Wenceslas, of all things. And this was her idea. What she wanted was a childlike contrast to the theme of the main song. And she also chooses to dispense with some of the opening verses and really just focus on the chorus, which is very much concerned with the unhappiness of the principal character of the song. The album closes out with 2 tunes from the musical Whoopee, and these are composed by Walter Donaldson and Gus Kahn. The first of these is Love Me or Leave Me, and this is an upbeat song, one of the most upbeat songs on the record, although it's not a total change of emotion because there's kind of a wry feeling that Nina imparts. And then, of course, the most famous song in this record now is the next one, the last one, side 1, which is My Baby Just Cares for Me, with its famous descending piano lick. And she does a sly little rewrite of the lyrics to include Liberace in the place of a woman's name towards the end of the song, suggesting that maybe her husband's commitment to her might have some nuance in gray areas. Anyway, it's a clever song, it's an interesting, intriguing song, it's full of little bits of irony and playfulness, and it's one of the highlights of her career. Side 2 starts with an absolutely spectacular instrumental, and that's the song Good Bait. In reviewing this record, I listened to this song several times through because it's a fascinating song. It reminds me, if nothing else, of Glenn Gould's latter-day treatment of the Goldberg variations, where he slows everything down. It's a very kind of quirky performance and totally radicalizes your sense of what that musical piece actually is. Very, very similar. The next song is Plain Gold Ring, which on the surface is a song about the sadness of being the other woman. Or as she sings it, maybe a little bit more than that, because there's this refrain about never knowing when she's going to be free and so on, and it's impossible, I find, to listen to Nina Simone without thinking of things from a civil rights perspective, because with her there are often layers of meaning. The next song is an instrumental, You'll Never Walk Alone, which is a Rodgers and Hammerstein favorite. This is an out-and-out display of her classical chops. This may be produced in a jazz album setting, but there's not much that's actually jazzy. So it really just shows the immense range that she had as a player. Next song is I Love You Porgy, which of course is the hit that really made her career. It's pretty good, I think, although I have a feeling that its popularity at the time probably had more to do with the familiarity of that song as a favorite amongst listeners at the time, because I think there are actually several much better songs on this record. And the album wraps up with one of her own compositions, Central Park Blues, hence the album cover, and for once is a fairly straight-up delivery of a jazz bop trio style, but there are so many different moods, from upbeat to more restrained to almost inaudible. It's really quite an interesting performance. This album is a remarkable collection of performances with a remarkable range of styles, all done within that 14-hour period, but so much breadth and so much skill on display. It's interesting to reflect on this album, consider there are 11 songs, 3 are instrumentals. The other 8, where she sings, are all songs about relationships, and almost all of those are about relationships gone bad. And the one that's ostensibly happy, which is My Baby Just Cares for Me, she manages to put her own kind of wry take on the lyrics and just add a bit of a twist at the end. So again, a window into her soul, I guess. It's not a perfect Nina Simone record. She, of course, is constrained by the fact this is a pretty straight-laced set list, and she only had so much power as a soloist on her first record. But nonetheless, I found it gripping from start to finish, and I would give it 4.5 out of 5 stars.